Hi again, guys, and welcome to yet another installment of Beards and Cars. This is a series for those who are maybe new since the last episode to the channel, where we discuss things in a more informal way, more of just a conversational style, where we talk about subjects that you might send in, or subjects that are maybe important or prescient to the channel, stuff that's going to change maybe, videos, how things are doing, that kind of stuff. And it could be to do with, as I said, cars, YouTube, movies, pretty much anything. It depends on the questions that you ask for the most part. Now, as always, we do have some questions from you guys last week, and the first one which we're going to go straight into is a very interesting one for me, and a very difficult one, funnily enough, to answer, and that is, what are my most hated or least favourite cars in terms of both performance and visual design? And to me, that's a very difficult question. Now, it seems like such an obvious thing if you have so many favourite cars, such as I do and many of you guys do as well. Pretty much any petrol head has their favourite cars. To not have your least favourite or even hated vehicles is quite a strange thing. But to be honest, I don't think there are really any cars that I can think of that I specifically hate. There are vehicles in certain games, such as the Chrome Line cars on Gran Turismo, which I think are just totally pointless. But I don't hate the car. I still don't hate the vehicle, and as I think those discerning people among you can probably tell, and I think I have mentioned this in the past, with my car reviews, although I may say that a certain car isn't as good, or maybe is bad in some certain way or ways, I very rarely totally bash a vehicle, because it's my strong opinion that every car is useful for something if you look hard enough. Even cars which are conventionally considered to be awful, something like, say, an AMC Pacer, known affectionately as the Goldfish Bowl. It's not a car which a lot of people would say that they like, but at the same time, I mean, ironically, I actually do like that car, but I'm just a fan of AMC in general, because I like how weird looking their cars are. But even a car like that has its uses. As far as hatchbacks go, it's extremely wide, and it's got a big capacity engine. That immediately means that if you lower it and drop the weight and stiffen up the suspension, you're going to have much better cornering stability with, say, modern upgrades than a smaller hot hatch could. It's going to be much more difficult to roll that car, for instance. Plus, the larger capacity engine means that you can quite easily squeeze a lot more torque and a lot more power out of it than a typical hatchback from, say, Europe of that same time period. So even a car that people would say is trash has its uses, you just have to think about it. And for most people, I think that's probably the main thing. They don't need to think about it. Whereas someone in my position who reviews those cars, I like to find the good in every car, if at all possible, and even in the series which I did called Boat, Better Off Avoiding These, which is the anti-version of the Dark series, even with those vehicles, I still mention the fact that quite a few of them are still fast cars. Something like the Chrome Line Cobra, for instance, is about the same as the normal Cobra in terms of performance. The XJ13, I believe, is fairly similar. It's a little bit different in terms of spec. In fact, all of the Chrome Line cars are a little bit different. Or the Stealth versions, for instance. I know a lot of people love the Stealth Mazda 787B, and a lot of people, so many people, say that it's a better car. I don't understand why so many people say that. I guess they must have bought that one and not bought the regular one, because it just isn't a better car. The specs are, if I remember correctly, basically the same. There might be a slight difference. And the performance, having purchased and tuned and driven both, is not that much different. You just end up paying something like 500,000 credits extra. So if you want black paint, for instance, yeah, that's cool enough. It's certainly reminiscent of the secret black versions on Gran Turismo 4, which would occasionally pop up in the dealerships. But apart from that, it's not really a necessary car. And I think for me, that's the kind of vehicles which annoy me more. Not vehicles that are bad, traditionally, but vehicles that just don't feel necessary. Or, in the real world, I would say cars that are maybe upgraded or tuned in a way that just doesn't suit the car. And I don't mean stuff like ricers. I know a lot of people love to hate on ricers, and it's kind of the fun thing to do, or to hate in the UK on chavs, for instance, which is essentially a version of the same thing. chavs in the UK are basically people who buy stuff like Vauxhall Corsas, slam it to the ground on some ridiculous wheels with a big exhaust pipe that makes way too much noise, draws far too much attention to a car, which, if you thought about it, you don't really want people looking at that much, because as soon as they do, they think, oh, it's a Corsa, or it's a Punto, or it's a Saxo, or whatever it is that they've done it to. But even then, I wouldn't do that. But I wouldn't condemn those people for doing it, because it's a matter of taste. Now, a lot of people would say they have no taste, and that's why they've done that. I can understand why you'd say that, but the way I think of it is, who am I to say what that person's taste should be? I wouldn't accept somebody else telling me what kind of cars I should like. So I wouldn't presume to tell them that that car is pointless, or that it's stupid. And I know that's a weird way of thinking that not many petrol heads do. It's fun to hate on things, and a lot of people who like cars love to hate on certain vehicles, especially because it makes you feel like part of a group with other people who hate the same thing. But for me, I don't care what other people think. I like what I like, and I respect other people who have strong individual opinions and also tastes. If somebody likes, for instance, a Vauxhall Corsa with a Rolls-Royce front end painted in terracotta, I wouldn't want it, but I respect the fact that they deliberately went out and tried something totally different to everyone else. So even chavs or ricers to some degree, I don't like the car, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they are wrong to, because it's just their choice. Now, with something like a ricer, for instance, when you see these, I mean real ricers, like the crazy modified Asian imports, or I guess it's not an import because a lot of them are still in Asia, but stuff like, I think Toyota Century sedans and that kind of stuff, really boxy vehicles that they then fit ridiculous body kits to, which are like 9 feet wide. They have wings that look like they were taken from a Hot Wheels car or the Cars movie from Pixar, and they make these vehicles that look kind of like an Alpha 155 DTM car on steroids. Massive chin splitters that serve no aerodynamic purpose apart from slowing the car down. I would never want to try and park one of those cars. I would be so scared of just tearing the bodywork off every time you try and fit into a parking space. But even then, I wouldn't want a car like that, but when I look at it, it does make me smile. I think that it's a hilariously ridiculous car in a very caricature kind of way. And that's actually something which I've always liked. I can't recall what they're called, what they're named, but you can actually buy those, I believe they're made of concrete or something like that, those model cars which have accentuated proportions, like the big skewed wheels that are ridiculously big, tiny little windows, like caricatures of vehicles, and there are plenty of pictures of cars like that on the net as well. They're like cartoon versions. I love that kind of stuff. It's like the car equivalent of spit an image, that kind of thing, where you caricature a person, a famous political figure, something like that. So when cars do the whole racing thing in real life, it makes me just think, oh, that's a caricature of like a racing car. And to me, I can't find that offensive. I wouldn't do it, but I find it funny to look at. I think it's cool in that weird kind of way. As far as specific cars that I don't like, well, again, I don't think there are really any that I hate. More so when I was younger, I used to say, oh, I hate this car, or I hate that car. But often cars that I initially don't like, as I mentioned in my Dream Garage episode recently, I end up loving. The Ferrari FF, I didn't initially like. The Rimac Concept 1, I initially didn't like. There are tons of cars which I didn't care for. Even the Tesla Model S, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the best daily driver ever made, even though it wouldn't be my first choice in terms of just what that car offers for the price that it is, regardless of whether or not it's electric. That's irrelevant. I'm just talking about it from a package point of view. 7 seats, incredible performance, all-wheel drive, great electric range, no sound, view that as a good or a bad thing, and for a price which is way lower than any other car that offers that kind of overall package, something like an FF or an Aston Martin Rapide, the Tesla is cheaper than all of those main rivals. So even the Tesla, for instance, I didn't like the Tesla when I first saw it. I didn't dislike it, but I just didn't care for it either way. The Fisker Karma as well. I initially didn't particularly like that car, and now I love it. So often cars which I initially didn't like, I completely do a 180 on over time. And it really goes to show the kind of power that a game has, because a game can really change your opinion on a vehicle just from using it. And in fact, again, another one of my dream cars And this is why Drive Club will always have a special place for me as far as racing games go. When I first played Drive Club, the Savage Rival GTR on that game, I couldn't care less about. I saw the car at Goodwood a few years before. Again, couldn't care less about it. I saw it, I thought, what is that weird looking thing? Looks like some kind of weird supercar sedan with racing stickers and a huge rear wing. What's up with that? And then I drove it on the game, and I started to realise just how cool a package this car was, being so fast but also so practical with 4 doors and 4 seats. And as many of you guys have realised from the way I talk about cars in the past, I'm a sucker for practical performance cars. If I have the option of having the same performance with a 4-door version, I will often choose that, because I love having that extra practicality. I don't necessarily need to use the practicality all the time, but just having it there appeals to me a lot. Something like the DB8 variant of the Honda Integra Type R. It's a super rare 4-door version of the DC2 Integra. I've seen one here in the UK. I love that car. First of all, I think it looks better than the coupe, proportionally, but also it's more practical. How cool is that? I also love the 4-door Skylines. I think they look so fantastic. I do prefer the coupe Skyline, but still, the 4-door one looks really nice. And that's kind of where it originated, really. There are more normal 4-door Skylines, I believe, than there are coupes. But that kind of thing, cars which I initially didn't like, I end up liking. Cars which are just upgraded in a, I would call a distasteful kind of way, but as I said earlier, that's for me, not for the person. That I'm not a huge fan of. But a lot of the cars that people do hate, I really like. Something like the Edsel, the Ford Edsel from way back in the day. I actually really like the look of that car. I would love to have a Ford Edsel, the 4-door sedan, and just totally paint it in like a pale turquoise with white, two-tone, like Chevy Impala style or Chevy Bel Air. Maybe get a bit of rust going on the bodywork, put some white wall tyres on it with steel rims, slam it to the ground, put a rusty old roof rack on top, and have it as like a surfer dude slammed classic American muscle car. I love that kind of thing. I can totally understand why people wouldn't. And actually, moving on a little bit from the rusty concept, that is one kind of tuning as well which I'm not a fan of. I'm not a fan of rat look. I can understand why people would be. It's got kind of a steampunk style to it, and I adore steampunk style as far as clothing, but I'm not a huge fan of the rat look. When it's done to an extreme, and the car basically looks like it's totally just orange rust everywhere, I'm not a fan of that. To me, you might as well just paint it matte orange at that point. I like a car that's rusty, but not just totally rust. To me, that misses the point. It goes too far. It's like if you like having mustard on chips, but then just covering the plate with mustard so you can't even see the chips. It's like, oh, what's the point? But maybe that's just me, and that's the whole point. Each person has their own likes and dislikes. As far as the next question, because we spent a lot of time on that one, car companies or manufacturers or marques that I think should be brought back. Well, this one is one which really appeals to me because, as you guys know, I love obscure, smaller manufacturers. I would have said TVR, but they are, of course, making a return, which is very nice to see. I'm looking forward to that. I'm not sure what the status of the company is, but I believe they are inactive. But I would love to see a return of Marcos as well. Similar to TVR, but kind of even more small and personal in terms of the company. And I'm such a huge fan of a number of Marcos cars. I love the TSO GT2 in modern times. In the 90s, I love the Marcos Mantis, which is a fantastic rival to the TVR Speed 12 in terms of its appearance. And I think my favourite Marcos of all time is the Mini Marcos. I love the Mini Marcos. It's such a cool little car. You take a Mini, you make it more aerodynamic, and you go to the Le Mans in it. They actually did that, and in the year that it competed, it was the only car, I believe the only British car, more specifically, to actually finish the race. So pretty cool. Not the fastest thing around, of course, but just a nice little car. And they are expensive these days. I mean, all classic cars are really expensive these days, but Mini Marcoses go for pretty insane prices. It's like $7,500, $8,000 last time I checked. Pretty good value if you bought one a few years ago. So yeah, companies like TVR, Marcos, but not just British ones, there are others too. A lot of the companies which I would have wanted to come back actually did, like Spiker. I'm a massive fan of Spiker. I love cars that are made in that very boutique, artisan kind of way, cars that really are drivable pieces of art inside and out. The kind of vehicle where if you look under the body, it's probably going to look just as good. It's not just about outward show, it's about making every single component of the car, even on its own, something that you would want to look at from an artistic point of view. That's the way Pagani makes their cars, that's the way Koenigsegg makes their cars, that's the way Spiker makes their cars, and a few others, Aston Martin to some degree, but I think Aston Martin kind of suffers a little bit from being a larger company, so they have a little bit more of an efficient layout compared to the handmade aspect of the others. But Aston Martin's not too far off. TVR as well, although with the quality side of things they don't really keep up that standard, but they look good inside and out. So what were we talking about again? Oh yeah, bringing cars or car manufacturers back from the dead. I think overall it's probably more specific vehicles which I would want to be brought back rather than manufacturers as a whole, because most of the manufacturers that I love are still around anyway. My favourite manufacturers include Panoz, Maserati, Marcos, TVR, Cadillac, that kind of thing. So a lot of my favourite manufacturers are going pretty strong or making a comeback. Ones which I like, which aren't around anymore, is fairly difficult. I don't think there are really that many. I would of course love to see Chaparral come back in some form, and I don't mean the Vision GT, as cool as that is. I mean to see Chaparral return, for instance, to the racing world. Acura made a tribute to Jim Hall, who was the owner of Chaparral, with one of their ARX LMP cars. It was finished in white with the number 66 as an homage to Chaparral, but I'd love to see them come back in some form, because for those who don't know, Chaparral isn't just about the crazy 2J and the little 2D. They have a lot more than that. They have active aero models, like I believe either the 2E or the 2F, I think had an active wing with an air brake. I can't remember which one it was, but one of their earlier models had aero that would work in tandem with the suspension, so that when the suspension height changes, the aerodynamics or the downforce would change. I can't remember which model that was. That might have been the 2E or the 2F, I don't recall. But they've had some incredible innovations, a number of which were banned, and some people don't know this, but Chaparral was the first manufacturer ever to use a wing in racing. People don't talk about Chaparral enough. They are such an amazing company, and again, such a small one, but with some incredible ideas. The fan car is the obvious one, but it goes way beyond that. They even participated in the Indy with the 2K02, which is yellow, finished even in Pennzoil livery, which incidentally I've always loved. And they have a Camaro as well, the Chaparral Camaro. And although I don't know how they would return or what they would do, I would just love to see them come back in some form. I don't think they'd produce a road car, because that's never really been Chaparral's style. So I guess if they did come back, it would probably be, I think most likely, either an LMP car, which would be awesome, to see that white livery with the 66 running in the Le Mans, or, because of course the Can-Am isn't going anymore, I would say maybe Formula E. And that's a strange choice, but I wouldn't be surprised if Chaparral did come back, if they came back with a Formula E car, because you're seeing quite a few manufacturers jump on the train with that, even some which were pretty dormant before that, like Venturi. I love Venturi cars. Venturi wasn't doing that much in the racing world, apart from maybe the odd sponsorship here and there, maybe some parts, and then they just bam, straight into the Formula E, and I love that. So yeah, I could imagine Chaparral returning in Formula E form, and maybe then later moving on to something like LMP, so I'd love to see them come back. And this one is never going to come back, I can pretty much say that for a fact, but I would still love it to, and that is my joint favourite race car of all time, because the 2J from Chaparral is my favourite car, not my favourite race car, but also secondary to that on equal footing is a car called the Haumet TX, which is a gas turbine-powered race car. Of course, it is, being me, and it's the only gas turbine race car to actually win a race. Some others came close, such as an Indy car. I believe it was either the Lotus 56 or the STP Special. I can't recall which one it was, but one of them nearly won an Indy event, but then got crippled at the end of the race, which is a shame. The Helmet, though, did win a race. And it's a gorgeous little car. There are videos of it starting up on YouTube. It sounds absolutely incredible. I would love to see Helmet return, but I think the gas turbine wouldn't be allowed to be used anymore in any kind of form that I'm aware of. I highly doubt that they would allow that in the Le Mans. But with that being said, they could try and run it in Garage 56, like the Delta Wing. So that could be cool. You could see a gas turbine powered car. And as I said way back in my video about my Dream Le Mans project, I would love to field a gas turbine LMP car in the Garage 56, so it could happen from a theoretical point of view, but I don't think it will happen because Helmet isn't going to return. Somebody else could do it, but I don't think they're coming back. As far as the next question, what do I think the best looking cars ever made are? Now, this is always going to be a controversial one. It's very personal, of course, and there are so many cars that I think look fantastic that it's always going to be one of those fluctuating lists. But I just came up with the 10 that came to my mind first that I would say are my favourite cars ever in terms of design. The Zonda F is one of them. Obviously, I think it's a perfect looking car. I would not change a single thing about it, especially in orange for me personally. The Maserati MC12, a car which looks incredible, and the fact that Maserati is my favourite manufacturer helps a lot as well. I just think that car is the epitome of high-performance elegance. Very few supercars look as elegant as an MC12. It basically looks like a dress, like a dinner dress, as a car, if you know what I mean. And it also goes to show that form does not have to cancel out function, or vice versa. You can have a race car which also looks beautiful, like a piece of art. Whereas some race cars, they just go totally for performance. Something like a Mosler, which incidentally is still a great looking car, but it doesn't care about being good looking. It's totally based on performance. Whereas the MC12 is a gorgeous car. The first generation Audi R8, the road-going coupe, the 4.2 litre, not one of my favourite cars, but it is one of my favourite designs. I think it's a beautiful supercar, or super sports car, I would say. Everything about that car just looks fantastic. I loved that car for probably the first month after it came out. Since then, it's kind of dropped down on my list, but I still love it from a design perspective, and I still prefer that V8 version over the V10. To me, the V10 doesn't even come close in terms of how good looking it is. I know a lot of people think, well, surely they just look the same, but they actually don't. The side intakes are different, the front bumper is different, the exhausts are different, and also the V10 version has the blacked out grille on the back, which the V8 doesn't have. And all of these little details, just to me, make the V8 version just look smoother, cleaner, and better looking overall. In a similar way, actually, to how the Cinque compares to the Zonda F. It looks more flashy, but to me that doesn't make it look better. In a similar way, the V10 looks more flashy than the V8, but as I said, I still prefer the V8. Another one, which is not one of my favourite cars, but is one of my favourite designs, is the Aston Martin DBS. I think it's one of the best cars they've ever made. The Volante in particular, say in silver with a red interior, fantastic looking machine. Another one, a classic now, is the Shelby Daytona Cobra. I think that's a gorgeous car, definitely one of my favourite classics. The Super Performance Daytona, which is the modern version that you can buy for like 90 grand, as well as being one of my dream cars, is, I would say, definitely one of the best looking designs ever. And like the MC12, it just goes to show that to be a great race car doesn't have to cancel out being fantastic looking. It wasn't as successful as it could have been because of Ferraris and the GT40 and that kind of stuff, but still, a gorgeous race car. Alongside that, speaking of the GT40, I would put the GT40 in there. In particular, though, the Gulf liveried 69 version, because some of the others, like the black one with the more square back end, that looks nice, but to me, I just love the more curvy approach of the 69 model. It's got these big curvy hips at the back, which when I was a kid always reminded me of an apple from the back, that kind of bulge that it has over the rear wheels. I love that. I think it's a fantastic looking car. And I love the twin pipes coming out the back on all of the GT40s. That looks so cool. Plus the Golf livery, of course, helps. Another one is the SLR from Mercedes. The SLR McLaren, I think, is a perfect design in a similar way to the Zonda or the MC12 for what it is and what it's going for, that classy, long-distance supercar. I think it just looks so stately. It's the kind of car that when you show up, it announces that you're there. In a similar way to stuff like the Aston Martin 177, it's a car that's designed to arrive in. Like, it's designed to be seen. So I think, yeah, the SLR looks fantastic. Especially the normal SLR or the Roadster. The 722, I don't like the little tacky additions that they made. It's a nice car, but I prefer the classier, simpler design of the original. Another one is the Jaguar CX-75, which I love that car. I still wish that Jaguar would make it, because even now it would still give a great rivalry to stuff like the McLaren P1, the 918, the LaFerrari. So it's a real shame that that one didn't get a chance. Then another one is the Isso Grifo. Not beautiful in a conventional way, it's more beautiful in like a Jensen Interceptor kind of way, but I love the Grifo. It's one of my favourite classics, it's one of the fastest classic GTs you can get. And then finally, for me, probably my favourite American car of all time, and this is actually one of my dream cars. I would call this my real-world dream car, because as I said in the dream car episode, those cars are all unlimited money. What I didn't touch on is my real-world dream cars, something that I would buy if I could actually, or if you actually stuck it to a real-world price, something which is more attainable, and for me that would be a 1959 Cadillac Buritz. I think that is a perfect looking classic. I love everything about that car if I had one, because as I said, they are actually quite attainable. You can pick them up for about $30,000 to $40,000 for a normal condition, non-modified one, in good condition. So, pretty good, considering. And I would have it in purple, with white wall tyres, slammed as low to the ground as you can possibly get, but on air suspension so that you can get over speed bumps, that kind of stuff. Maybe with either a red leather or white leather interior. I love the Buritz. So, yeah, I think that would be the 10 for me. There are definitely more. I would say, for me personally, something like an Adonis as well, the B Engineering Adonis, but I know a lot of people don't like the look of that car. So I was thinking of more cars that are beautiful in a slightly more conventional way, but at the same time definitely appeal to me personally. And I think overall we'll probably leave it there for this episode. But we've got a couple of questions for next week that I'll get into. And for now, that's about it. So, as always, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. The best... Try English. For the subject of having favourite cars in terms of looks, of course, that is the most subjective of arguments you can have. So I'd love to hear what you guys think are the best-looking cars ever made. There could be some crossover with some of the ones that I mentioned, but chances are probably some different ones. Maybe some Astons in there, some Jags, some Porsches. So I'd love to hear about that, and also maybe cars that you don't like. So yeah, as always, if you want to slap down some questions for next week, then feel free to do so. That's always welcome. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.